Yankee fans, you're in for a real treat. Bryan Hoch covers the Yankees for MLB.com. You follow him on Twitter, now on X. You see him on SNY. You see him on Yes Network, the MLB channel, on Zoom. He's everywhere. He's my favorite source for Yankee news, along with Jack Curry. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Bryan Hoch. Bryan, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Honor to be on with you. And yeah, and I'm happy we're able to make this work. So I'm looking forward to it.
Bryan, there's a lot of excitement in Yankee land. The Yankees heated up the winter meetings in Nashville. We know that with the Juan Soto trade. We'll talk about Juan in a little bit, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at the current Yankees through the prism of Aaron Judge. And with that in mind, let's start with your book, 62.
There it is.
Very, very well received, critically acclaimed.
Thank you.
First thing out of the box is, how does it make you feel that it's so well received?
I love it because, I feel like whether you're a Yankee fan or just a general baseball fan, if you're 8 years old, if you're 80 years old, there's something for you in this book. And that was kind of my goal there, is to kind of connect these three great Yankee right fielders in Babe Ruth, Roger Maris, and now Aaron Judge, who have all held this single season home run record that means so much in the grand scope of baseball. And so to kind of dive in and get to not just tell the story of Aaron Judge's season in 2022, which was one of the best offensive seasons that I've ever seen, but to get to compare it and do the flashbacks to 1961 and what was going on with Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle going back and forth, and to kind of bring them in as characters in the book, because that's the one thing the Yankees do better than anybody else, is they treasure their history and they celebrate their history. And so as much as a character as Aaron Judge was in this book, I also wanted Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle to be characters in this book too. And so hopefully, I think that there's something for every fan. If you pick up this book, you're not only just reliving 2022, but it's kind of a time capsule of all of Yankee history and baseball history.
I love it, Bryan. I love the touch of the foreword written by Roger Maris Jr. If you will allow, I just want to read the opening of the book, of the foreword by Roger. This record has been a big part of my life. I was almost 3 years old in 1961 when my father and his teammate, Mickey Mantle, chased an iconic record held at the time by Babe Ruth, who hit 60 home runs 34 years earlier. My dad hit his 61st home run on the season's final day, setting a new single-season home run record that would stand for nearly 4 decades. Many resented my father for breaking a mark set by one of the early legends of the game. But my father always maintained that records were made to be broken and that Babe Ruth was still going to be the hero he had always been. He was right. With that in mind, Bryan, I'd like to welcome in Mickey Mantle's son, Danny Mantle. Danny, thank you for joining us.
And thank you for having me, Mike. And Bryan, it's a pleasure to see you. I can't remember if we've ever met, but it's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we have met a couple of those events at Yankee Stadium, but there's always a lot of people. So it's great to have you one-on-one here, or two-on-one, and get a chance to kind of catch up. But it's great to see you again.
It's a pleasure. And I honestly want to just say congratulations on the book. And
thank you.
Although I haven't got to read it yet, I really want to. And that season that Judge had was just such an amazing season. And not only breaking Roger's record, but how close he came to the Triple Crown. And of course, Dad had won the Triple Crown in '56. So. I mean, that would have been so huge had he been able to do both of those, So that's what I was going to want to ask you was that a lot in his mind? Did he even realize how close he was to, getting the Triple Crown as well? I thought that was
Aaron knew because we were telling him every day that, hey, yeah. We're watching Luis Rise with Minnesota then, and then just tracking it as far as the batting chase was. And what I think what it showed was how difficult it is to do all three of those things, because as great a season as Aaron had, he was getting worn down at the end by the home run chase. He was not getting as many pitches to hit. So the at-bats he really did get had to count. And so, but if you talk to him, he always talks about the importance of hitting 300. He is a power hitter. He is, of course, but in his mind, he wants to be a 300 hitter too. And so, yeah, he was keeping tabs on that batting race. And it became clear at the very end that it was probably just too big of a gap for him to make up. I think he had about 8 batting average points in the last week to catch up. But there was even some talk. Aaron Boone went to him that last game and said, "Hey, do you want to play and try to," and this was after he'd hit 62. He said, do you want to try and catch up on the batting title? And he looked at what he needed to do. And I think it was something like he needed to go 7 for 9 and on the last day of the season. And he was just like, no, it's not going to happen. But I think it speaks to what a great player Mantle was. I mean, we all know that, but to even try to compare modern day to your dad's time, it's hard to do. It's hard to live up to that shadow for sure.
I just thought that was such an amazing season, man. I mean, it was, of course, Judge is my favorite player today. And, I've just watching him is just something, number one is his size, because, Dad was considered probably one of the bigger guys back in his day, and he was 5'11", 195, and I think Judge is like 6'7", 280 or something.
6'7", 280. Yeah, your dad didn't play against guys like that.
Oh man, and that was, to me, that's just an amazing, amazing thing for a guy, and as quick as he is in that right field, man. I mean, that's why I said he's my favorite guy, and just to see someone that size be able to move like that in the outfield is unbelievable to me, And I just wish my dad could be here to see, him play, that, because I know that he would be, and like you were saying, I don't know him personally, but just seeing him, listening to his interviews and, how he does take hold of the history of the Yankees and that type of thing is, it's kind of rare these days to see that. And, I'd seen a interview with him, and the guy had said, "Well, who's your Yankee Mount Rushmore?" Well, and he had the 3 of the guys in there were guys, it was Yogi, Dad, Ruth, and I think Mariano was his other one. But you can just tell that he, the history of the Yankees means a lot to him. So that means a lot to us as well. So I think it's just a spectacular. Not only is he a spectacular player, but he's just a all-around good guy. As far as I know, I'd love to meet him sometime. So.
And Brian and Danny, very well said all the way around. And one of the things, Brian, that I could tell you was during this chase, Danny and I would text each other like almost on a daily basis, and he truly was, rooting all the way along. But it was amazing to think, and at the season's end, and you guys touched on it, he finished with a 311 batting average. Luis Arraez 316, not that far apart.
Yeah,
that
5 points. How about that?
It's unbelievable, and that would have been
he was
amazing
ahead too for a while. I mean,
yeah,
there was. I mean, it was looking unbelievable. So,
I want to ask Brian a question because I love what you guys gravitated to immediately was not just the home runs, but the batting average. And I think that is a very important issue. And Brian, that's where later on, I'm going to tie that together with Judge and looking at the current team. But what is so interesting, and you mentioned, Brian, just now, you said he was aware of it because we were constantly reminding him of it. But I also feel that he was inherently aware of it. And many times in the post game, he would bring it up. He would bring it up how important batting average was to him. And I think we know that it might be inscribed in his glove, 179, Brian. I don't know if it is, but that was his batting average in his, truncated, 2016 season. So I think he's very aware of batting average, and I love it. Brian, your thoughts?
Absolutely. Now, as a matter of fact, the last series of the year in Kansas City, when we were, trying to wrap up this Yankee season that did not go the way everybody thought it would, and they finished with 82 wins and didn't go to the playoffs, we crowded around Judge's locker, and he kind of opened the door a little bit for 10 minutes and started saying, and which he doesn't do often, but he said that things around here need to change. And one of the things that he pointed to was that, you know, we're looking at a lot of numbers, but we might not be looking at the right numbers. And so it turns out he was talking about batting average and RBIs, these staples of the game that I feel like a lot of people have gotten away from, and they're not focusing on anymore. And I think that they still work. They still work. If you have a team full of guys with high batting averages and lots of RBIs, you're going to win a lot of games. And so I think that's something he would like to see the Yankees prioritize more, because they've brought in a lot of these guys who hit, you know, 210, 220 and strike out a ton. And it just doesn't work all the time. It's not consistent enough. And you can't sit around and wait for the 3-run homer every single game. So I think that that's one way the game has definitely changed here. And maybe it's going to shift a little bit backwards, but and I do remember late in the home run chase, he was talking about Miguel Cabrera, and the Yankees were facing the Tigers. And he was just saying, look at Miguel Cabrera's career lines over his whole entire career. You hit 300 every year with some power, and you're going to wind up in Cooperstown. And that's where Miguel's going. And Aaron Judge is on that track too, if he can stay healthy. And that's been the big question, of course. He missed a lot of time this past year, but when he was on the field, he was very productive. And so the Yankees just need to figure out a way to keep him going and get him in 150, 160 games next year.
Brian, I love it. Since we have Danny, this ties into exactly what you just said, and just everything that you said, right on point. Danny, what I want to say is, one of the things that I remember, it's a very famous quote by your dad. He said one of his biggest regrets in baseball was he allowed his lifetime 300 batting average to dip just below 300. He ended his career at 298, Brian, because he held on for another year or two when he in retrospect should have retired. Danny, do we have that correct?
Yeah. And, that was the biggest, probably the biggest disappointment in his career, was going under the 300, because, back then, like Brian was saying, I mean, it was so important, because you went by your average, RBIs, strikeouts, which Dad held forever. Yeah, he hated that. But, his biggest threat, or biggest upset, was going under 300. But, back then, I think his biggest fear was, what am I going to do after I'm done playing? Because, back then you played year to year, you got a yearly contract. So it wasn't like you had a huge contract. So he had to keep playing. And, he always said, he goes, I could still hit. He said, but I couldn't run. And so he just had no running ability. And, he waited probably, because if you look at Willie Mays's lifetime average, it's only 302, which is nice. But I mean, Dad and Willie were always compared so much. I think Dad his biggest regret was not being over 300. So, because he knew he was a 300 hitter. And I think it just really got to him that he didn't keep that up, and had to stick around maybe a year or two too long. So, because like I said, he still had power. He just didn't have the wheels to get him around. So,
Danny and Brian, I'd like for you to weigh in on something else that I find very interesting about Brian's book. The title, Aaron Judge, the New York Yankees, and the Pursuit of Greatness. Now, what I found interesting is that the book does not end. The book continues. It goes into the postseason. Okay. Yes, they beat Cleveland, but it was not a good series against the Houston Astros for the Yankees, nor for Aaron Judge. I believe he was like 1 for 16 with a single up the middle. Now, my question is, Brian, was there any intent with the book in terms of telling the story, where when we talk about the Yankees and greatness, I feel it needs to culminate with a championship? As great as the accomplishment was, when he's chasing history, we know that Babe Ruth in 27, we know how that season turned out with a championship. We know in 61, Danny, we know what happened in 61. It ended up with a parade. Okay, Brian, was there any significance that the book continues a little bit beyond 62?
Yes, I went back and forth a little bit on that, because you want everything to be wrapped up in a nice tidy bow, and Judge hits the big home run and he takes his victory lap, but that it would not have told the complete story. And the pursuit of greatness there, it has kind of a double meaning in that, yes, he's chasing Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle that year, but he's also chasing a title. And that's how you get ultimate greatness in the Bronx. And I think we have a chapter in there called Unfinished Business at the end, where Judge talks about why he came back to New York, because he did not accomplish his mission. Yes, he broke the home run record and he put up some great individual numbers, but it's a team game. And, you know, when you're standing in right field and you're looking around, you don't see banners that say division champions or wild card winners. I mean, the Yankees are a team that has won 27 World Series titles, and we all know that, and they're the most successful franchise in professional sports. And if you're going to be the star player of the New York Yankees, if you're going to be the captain, if you're going to be someday in Monument Park, as I expect Judge will be, you're kind of judged on how many titles you brought in. You know, Don Mattingly is the one guy out in Monument Park who did not get there. But for the most part, a lot of these guys have World Series rings at home. And, you know, you look at the back of the baseball card, their numbers, they're proud of those numbers. But I think if you talk to every single one of those guys, what they really value is the championships. And I remember talking to Yogi about this, and how Yogi had 10 World Series rings. And it's just nobody will ever catch that. And so to be a part of that, I think that's how you get to that next level. And that's what Aaron Judge needs to do. And a lot of that is out of his control, of course. You're coming off a year where the team did not perform well, but he did his job. But now they got to put it all together. And as the captain, that responsibility is going to fall on him.
Well said. Danny, Mickey had 7 rings. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, excuse me. You know, obviously getting to the World Series, of course, you know, like Brian was saying, I mean, you'd have to play in a heck of a lot of World Series like those guys did, you know, because Dad still holds, I think it's 6 records in World Series play. And so, but you would have to play in a hell of a lot of World Series to get there, you know. So let's see, I think he played in 65 games in World Series play. But one of the things that has stuck out to me, because I've watched a couple of interviews with you, Brian, was that, you know, Aaron sounds a lot like Dad, because back then, I mean, a lot of the players, or all the players, really took care of those 2 guys, Roger and Dad, because, you know, they feel bad in a sense that they're the only ones getting all the, you know, the charades and all that. But you know, the players that are in your clubhouse are the ones that are going to help you pull through. And it sounds like he had that in his, you know, that year. And that means a hell of a lot, I think. So, but yeah, those, you know, to be able to play in the amount of World Series, because Dad, you know, in their first, or his first 14 years, they went to 12 series and they won 7 of them with Dad. So, you know, but I mean, those teams were so damn good that, you know, I mean, and Judge, I mean, I can see these teams that he's on, they, you know, they've got a chance to get quite a few in there. So, you know, just hopefully, you know, injuries and things like that don't get to Aaron, as, you know, like they have in the last couple of years. But, you know, he's a winner, man. He's a player, and I think, you know, he'll pull through it. So,
Danny, want to thank you for a few minutes, and it was fantastic. Brian, before we move on, final thoughts with Danny?
Danny, fantastic to hear from you. I love your dad. He's my all-time favorite Yankee player. So it's just a real honor and a treat to get to chat a little bit about the current day Yankees with you, and hope to see you out at Yankee Stadium real soon.
well, me too, Brian. And like I said, congrats on the book, and I am going to read it as soon as I can get one. And
Make sure I get a copy to you.
Well, thank you so much. And it was a pleasure meeting you and seeing you, and Mike, you too. Always a pleasure.
Danny, thank you so much. Merry Christmas to you and the family, and we're going to make sure we get that book out to you. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'll talk to you very, very soon.
So much. And
Okay.
pleasure to see both y'all, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Merry
Danny.
Christmas to you and family.
Very cool.
Very cool, right? Okay.